Cool. So I'm 29 years old now, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about in this video, I wish that I knew when I was 20. So anyone that's in your early 20s, watch this video right through to the end, and I think it will impact positively on your financial success earlier and your relationship success. In a blink, you'll be 29. So as I said, recently I turned 29 years old, and when I was in my early 20s, 21, 22, I thought becoming 29 was a thing way far in the future, but actually in reality, you're there in a blink. You're there really, really quickly. You've got to take things seriously. You've got to take things seriously. If you're in a position now where you're in a job that you don't like, if you're in a position now you're in a relationship that you don't like, if you don't take things seriously now, within 7, 8, 9 years' time, it's going to catch up with you in a blink. You're going to be there and you're going to wonder where all that time went. What you're going to be thinking in that time is that you wish that you committed. You wish that you committed to something, anything that could become something big that you desire in the future. You're going to wish that you committed to that sooner. So one of the main takeaways, the first takeaway I want to say is fully commit to something. Fully commit to something that has big potential, whether it's a new business opportunity, whether it's career that you want, whatever it is, commit to it now, because you are going to wish when you were 29 that you committed to something. When you get to 29 years old, the position you're going to be in is most of your friends are going to be in normal jobs. Some of your friends will have good jobs. Some will have normal businesses. The people that I know that are the most successful committed to something when they were 20, 21. Most people don't. This is like 1% of people. They committed to something when they were 20, 21, 22 years old. They stuck with it for 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And in the end of it, they were highly successful. Highly successful they are now. And they've either sold that business or they're at the top of their career. And that's because compounding does catch up with you, but you can't see it in the early days. 1, 2, 3, 4 years it takes to even start seeing serious amounts of compounding. Stick with that thing now. Try and think logically where you will be by the time you're 29 if you stick to that thing now, and try and not let your emotions despair you from that mission. So I thought I'd be a millionaire by the time I was 25, and that didn't happen. And the reason that didn't happen is because I underestimated how hard it would be to get there. I underestimated the effort that was required to get there, and I didn't put in enough work. I wasn't fully committed. So the second thing I want to talk about here is that sheer commitment that it's going to take to be that CEO, to be the top of a company by the time you're 29, to own a business by the 29 that's actually successful, that's actually making 6 figures in profit or whatever you want it to be. The commitment that it takes is a lot more than what you think. When you're 20, 21, 22, 23, it's more about talking than it is doing, because you see all these dreams and you feel like you've got this many, many years ahead of you, which you have, but you think it's going to go a lot slower than what it is. You think it's going to be easier to achieve them goals to what it is. And it's very easy to get over-inspired without actually being willing to put in the work or without putting in the work. So most people that are in their early 20s are putting in 20% of the amount of work they need to do in order to achieve what they hope they want to achieve, in order to achieve what they want to achieve by the time they're 29. Okay, I'll say that again. Most people are only putting in 15 to 20% of the work that is required to achieve the goals they think they can achieve by the time they're 29. You need to put in the work, a lot more work than what you think, but you need to be willing to put that work in. And that's what I'm talking about here. Some people aren't willing to put that work in, and that's totally fine. Some people are okay to have a normal job by the time they're 29, or a good job, you know, and they don't have to sacrifice loads of stuff. That's fine. But if you want to achieve huge goals and make a huge impact and do what you want to do by the time you're 29, do you actually, them things that you want to achieve, say, for example, I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 25, I was putting in nowhere near amount of effort to do that. And I wasn't sacrificing. I was still going out with friends every weekend and getting pissed. I was still spending way too much time with girls that I no longer even talk to, you know, just messing around. Like, you've got to have a reality check with yourself, you know. It's no small feat to be a millionaire by the 25. It's no small feat to be a millionaire by the time you're 29. It's no small feat to have a highly successful business by the time you're 29. So if you want that, then you have to start committing now, and you have to put in the work now for that. Not later, now, but you have to be willing to do that. So you need to have a little word with yourself, and that will include a lot of sacrifice. So you've got to be okay with that. The third part I want to touch upon here that I wish I learned in my 20s sooner was the fact that, look, I see a lot of men chasing chasing women all the time, exhausting their energy trying to hook up with women, exhausting their energy trying to slide into the DMs of women, trying to date women, trying to hook up with women, get laid, whatever it is. And them people, a lot of them, by the time they're 27, 28, 29, they feel behind in life and they've exhausted all of this energy, which is sometimes, you wouldn't believe it, the time these guys spend on like Tinder or just like, trying to message these girls and always exhausting all of their energy just trying to get girls that they're not even going to have any long-term meaningful relationship with most of the time by the time they're 28, 29. And then all of that input they could have been putting, all of that energy could have been going into building a business. It could have been going into building the career that you want, or quite frankly, being a better person. Another thing I want to touch upon here is that those guys that I see that wasted a lot of their time in their 20s chasing women, meaningless sex, all of this stuff, a lot of them struggle a little bit mentally later on in life because it all catches up on them how they treated them women. And you don't feel good when you're older when you do that. You don't feel good. So not only do you not feel good about that when you're older, you won't be putting in the work that is required to achieve something significant when you're 29. And people will look at you as just a bum. They're just a bum. They haven't achieved anything significant. It's okay to have a bit of fun when you're younger. It's okay to do that stuff and enjoy your early 20s. Of course it is. Go out, get with some girls, whatever. Or if you're a girl, get with some guys, whatever. But don't let that be everything. There's a lot more to life than that, that meaningless hookups and things like that. There's a lot more to life than that. You need to focus on more of a purpose. Figure out what impact you want to make or what life you want to have by the time you're 29, because it will catch up on you. The next thing I want to talk about in your early 20s, which I think you should take into account, is the fact that I think more people should just work a job. I think more people should work a job. Obviously, I don't want to go into that cliche stuff where it's, everyone should be a CEO and entrepreneurship. That's everyone knows logically that's not right for everyone. But actually digging into that a little bit deeper, I would have a word with yourself. If you want to just do a normal job, and I would say that's totally fine. Try and aim for just to survive in this world. A decent salary, a job that has some sort of decent salary, 40, 50, 60K a year, aspirations, at least within sort of a few years' time, that's great. You can live quite a comfortable life off that. If you want to be like a CEO, if you want to be a founder, if you want to start multiple businesses, if you want to achieve something big, please don't underestimate the work that's required to do that. I touched on that a little bit earlier. I'm going to touch on it a lot more now. You will lose friends doing that, going after what you want to go after, because they won't believe in you. Or if you start achieving stuff, you will lose friends, and we'll talk about that later. There'll be many days, many weeks, many months where the stress is just too much. Now, some people can handle this a lot better than others. Some people can't handle it, and they shouldn't be in business. You're the last line of defense if you're a business owner, if you're a CEO, or if you're a company owner managing high volume of complaints or high volume of turnover, whatever you're managing, you're the last line of defense. There's always going to be that stress. Sometimes there'll be a lot of sleepless nights and stuff like that. Now, all of this stuff you kind of expect, but the reality of it is very, very different. And I just want you to understand the undertaking that it is. It's just not fun a lot of the time, having your own business. It's not fun a lot of the time. Whenever you increase your earning, generally what you're doing, unless you've got this sort of passive income thing, which is very, very rare. I'd say generally passive income doesn't exist because there's always a level of responsibility. But generally, if you're increasing your income, then you're increasing your level of stress that you're willing to undertake. And you've got to be okay with that. So like when I used to have my gardening business and I was earning, 25, 30 grand a year or something, when I was 19, I could actually go home and switch off with that, or do a few leaflets. When I increased my business and this year, for example, do around about $1 million or something like that in our business, we've had some significant months where I've earned a lot of money, and paid myself some good money. But what came with that was a lot more responsibility. What came with that was a lot more problems. What came with that was a lot more sleepless nights, high stress. So generally, especially in the early days, you're going to increase your stress, and you have to increase your stress tolerant as you increase your income. And if you look at someone on a six-figure salary, you may think, oh, I wish I had that. But would you? Like, would you wish you had that? Because they're paying for that in some way, you know. Usually it's having to sacrifice some kind of, for me, I sacrifice loads of weekends. I still sacrifice loads of evenings. I sacrifice a lot of my mental clarity just to constantly be pushing in business. And as you increase your income, you're increasing your stress levels. As you increase your income, you're increasing the time that you work and everything like that. So just be okay with that. You've got to be okay with the fact that you're going to be increasing all of them things if you want to increase your finances. But I think ultimately a lot more people should not think that they need to have anything other than a normal job. That's totally fine. Or something that at least has medium aspirations should tick a lot of your boxes in life. Don't feel like you look at all these people with businesses and you have to do that too, because you don't. You know, you could get fulfillment from other areas of life. The next thing I want to touch upon here, the next point, is losing friends as you grow, whether you grow in your personal life, just as you get older, or in business, especially in business. As you grow, like when you're like 20, 21, 22, I remember when I was 21, 22, all that sort of thing, I had some different friends. The people that I hung around with, for the most part, I would say 80, 90% of them, I don't actually hang around with anymore, and they're not my friends. Some of them I thought were going to be friends of life, and I'm literally saying this to you now, completely shocked at the friends that I've lost along the way that I thought were going to be friends for life. Like, when I say to you, not 1 ounce of me believed that we would ever not be friends because we were that close. Now we're not friends. That's just happens, you know, especially if you're trying to achieve high stuff. So there's sort of 2 parts for this. The first part is if you want to achieve high things, if you want to go after, you know, trying to have a successful business or something like that, if you end up doing that, if you end up achieving something of significance, it doesn't mean the multi-million-pound business, just anything that is considered abnormal, good achievement, whatever, a lot of friends are just not going to be able to deal with that, right? And I'm not going to go too far into this because I think there's enough out on the internet about this already, but you will lose some friends because they're either not willing to keep up with you, they don't want to hear about your business stuff, they get a little bit jealous, something like that. Even if they earn the same money in their job, there's just something a little bit special about sort of having your own business and doing it yourself. And it's more sort of the mindset that you cultivate for yourself in order to achieve that, and the hard times that you go through does actually kind of change you as a person. It makes you sometimes less tolerant to bullshit. It makes you less tolerant to people that haven't got the same aspirations for you. And that doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. They're a good person. You're a good person. It just means you sort of slowly, gradually distance each other, and you will just know. So whenever that starts happening, it's a pretty good sign you're probably not going to be friends in future. So maybe just stop putting so much effort into that friendship. Not all of them, you know, sometimes it can be normal to get a little bit distant, then go back together. But I remember generally, you know, the second part of this is just generally losing friends as you grow anyway. I remember when I started first thinking that I was getting a bit distant from my friends, and I thought, you know, overthought it and thought there was something wrong with me, or I was not being a very good friend, or I was doing something wrong, when in reality we were just clashing because I was growing, they weren't growing, or they were growing in an area that I wasn't interested in, and we were just sort of having these differing opinions as we grew up. And that's just totally normal, right? You will get to a place by the time you're 29, or you should do if you've done some personal development and you constantly learn from your mistakes and you learn from everything that happens and actually give your time to think about it. Then you'll get to a place when you're 29, just coming into your 30s, where you will understand that it's extremely normal for a lot of friends to not be in your life forever. And that's totally fine. So now I see them friendships as like a great learning lesson, great times I had in my life. Like, honestly, I still value them a lot now as old experiences and friends that I have. But I don't wish that I were friends with them now most of the time, because, you know, we're just different people. And sometimes it's just best to park that stuff in the past and just leave it there. You will get to a stage where you're actually totally fine with how it's all worked out. And actually, as you get older, maybe it's just my personality, but I know a lot of people that are like this as well. They prefer a lot more of their own time anyway. They don't need as many friends. And quite frankly, I think it's bullshit. Most people that say they've got more than 5 friends, you can usually count your friends on one hand, or less than that. Like, I mean, real friends, friends that are really there for you. Most people that say they've got more than that, I think it's just bullshit. Maybe they don't know that they're not real friends, but most people have got maximum 5 close friends that they can depend on. And some friends that you have right now will come with you. A very few of them will come with you, by the time you're 29. But a lot of them won't, And actually, I'll be more concerned if they were still with you by the time you're 29, a lot of them, because you should be growing as a person. And if you've still got the exact same friends you had in school, maybe you're all just doing the same thing and none of you have been growing, Like, you just lose friends as you grow, and that's totally normal. So, yeah, I just want to say you will get to a place by the time you're 29 where a lot of your friends, you'll be shocked that they're not still your friends, but you'll also be totally fine with it and at peace with it. So this leads me on to point number 6, which is try not to get attached to anything. You'll be really tempted to get attached to relationships when you're 20, 21, 22. Most of them aren't going to work out. A lot of them friendships, a lot of them actually, relationships, intimate relationships, the word I'm looking for. A lot of them won't work out. A lot of businesses you may have may not work out. Some jobs you have may not work out, but you may get emotionally really connected to them. I would say just try and understand that most things don't last forever. And most things, if you look back on it, most things don't last for, unless it's like a close family member or a really close friend, or like a relationship that's really meant to be forever. Most things don't last forever. And if you look at the last couple of years, a lot changes, You end up moving on from that job that you thought you were going to have forever because you got a bigger opportunity. You believe that business you had 2 years ago was the one you're going to be forever, but you've moved on from it because you've grown and got a new opportunity and things like that. Same with the house that you buy. You think it's amazing, then you move on because, that should happen because you constantly be growing. But just try not to get too emotionally attached to things, because as I've grown, I've realized that, by the time I'm 29, I've realized that the things that happened to me in my 20s, it was much more about the experience of the thing and the skills that I learned from doing the thing rather than actually the thing itself, rather than attaining the thing itself. I've bought multiple cars, a lot of them earlier on. Don't really care about cars that much now I've got older. It's funny enough. Now I can buy the cars that I've always wanted to buy. I've stopped buying them because I'm not really interested. I was only doing it because I wanted to prove to people that I could buy them, if that makes sense. But as I was buying these cars, like, for example, I got really emotionally attached to them. I thought they were everything, I was like, I look so cool, everyone likes it. I look back on it now and I'm like, what even was that? Like, no one cared. No one cares about all that sort of stuff. So emotionally, don't get too attached to, I would say, them early relationships that you have. You probably know deep down if it's your long-term thing or not. If not, maybe don't get too attached to it. Same with a lot of the businesses you're going to have, a lot of the jobs you're going to have. Just look at it as the skills that you're learning. Like, you're filling up this bucket of skills in your life. Like every experience you have, every job you have, every business you have, every relationship you have. I've learned so much from each one. What not to do in a relationship, like what not to do in a business, what not to do in a job, how not to treat a girl, how to treat a girl, how to deal with clients, how not to deal with clients. You're filling up these buckets. I would see it as filling up buckets rather than actually attaining that relationship or attaining that business or attaining that certain amount of money. Because by the time you're 29, you will be able to look back on the last almost 30 years of your life, and you will be a lot more wise. You'll understand why some of these people are single and still single, and you can get almost a little bit arrogant and see, oh, they've got that trait, and I remember when I had that trait, or like this person's trying to succeed in business, and you can see why they're not quite succeeding, not in an arrogant way, but just with that wisdom you've accumulated. So it's filling up them buckets of skills, and experiences are much more important than the actual thing. So don't get emotionally too attached to any relationship, any friendship, any business, or anything really, because all of it can go. You lose family members, you lose relationships, you can lose businesses. What you can't lose is the skills and the experience that you've attained from doing it. Point number 7, I just want to touch upon relationships and intimate relationships and friendships and all that sort of stuff again, and just talk about. I honestly think that, let's look at relationships for this specifically. Most people think that relationships are supposed to sort of be a certain way, and they're supposed to feel a certain thing the whole time. This is what I've learned, you know, from which I knew when I was earlier in my 20s and what I'm 29 now. Most people think that, you know, you should always be happy in a relationship, or even if they're not consciously thinking that, you know, if someone says, oh, you're not always going to be happy, you sort of sling it off and go, oh yeah, I know, but you're not always going to be happy in a relationship. And the truth is, you're not always going to be happy in like an intimate relationship. You're not always going to be feeling fully connected in an intimate relationship. You're not always going to feel super connected and super passionate in a relationship as well. And a lot of my past relationships, and I'm not even just talking about intimate relationships, I mean friendships, a lot of them have broken down because I was expecting to feel a certain way, and I was listening to my emotions way too much, especially when it comes to relationships. Emotions and your feelings are not facts, right? Some therapy I did in the past taught me that really well. Like, your feelings are not facts, they're just feelings. When you're 29, you will look back on a lot of the relationships you had, friendships you had, and a lot of them, just quite frankly, could have worked out a lot better if you didn't just have this idealization of what you thought it should be get in the way. So I think there's two main reasons why relationships don't work. And let's just go with intimate relationships here. But I'm not just talking about intimate relationships. But let's just focus on that for now. There's two main reasons why I think they don't work. And the first reason, I think, is just a breakdown of communication. I think it's so crazy how most people in relationships just don't talk to each other enough. I spoke to like an 80-year-old the other day, and he said, and I said to him, he was in a relationship like 45 years with his wife or whatever, they've been going out for 45 years. I said, what's your number one advice? And he said, communication. I said to my parents, what's your relationship advice? Communication. I said to someone else, I think it was when I was in Spain on holiday, an elderly couple, I said, what's your number one advice around relationships? They said communication. You know, like these aren't coincidences. You know, you see it online. I've seen a lot of people interviewed on there about relationships. How do you sustain a long-term relationships? Communication. Because you can have this idea of what someone's thinking, or you can be thinking that the relationship isn't working out and you're getting in your own head. And because you're not communicating that with your partner, you're not expressing how you feel. Therefore, they can't help you with it. Sometimes just talking to them relieves all of this. And then you need to communicate with like a bit of a deep chat a couple of times a quarter or something like that, a few times a year, just to filter out all the sort of BS that your head fills up, you know, and then also just communicate more about things that are happening in life and, like, you know, your finances. It may just be down to your finances. A lot of couples break up just because they're not talking about their finances and someone's spending money that they didn't know they were spending, for example. You know, it's all just breakdown of communication that could be sorted. And then the second reason, I believe, is that people get into their own heads of seriously just over-expecting stuff, over-expecting to feel good all the time. If their relationship for a couple of weeks, or for 2 or 3 weeks, you feel like you haven't got this spark, and I'll get onto the spark next, what a load of bullshit that is. You feel like you haven't got that spark in the last couple of weeks. That's totally normal. It's totally normal. And I saw someone speaking about this a while ago, and it really resonated with me. They said people need to treat their intimate relationships a little bit more like their family members, you know? Sometimes when you're family, you know, like your sister or your brother or your mum, you don't always expect there to be this like connection and this spark between you of, like, you know, you're always getting on really well, everything's good. Sometimes you're just bored. Sometimes you're walking around, you're like, oh, I want to go home, I'm bored of this, let's go to the park and then go home. And then the next time you have a really good chat and you're really good. That's just normal humans being humans, you know, like, you don't have to overthink not feeling emotionally connected to your partner all the time, this kind of stuff, you know, because I always think to myself, if someone has got on for like years in a relationship, even a year, 2 years in a relationship, 3 years in a relationship, they know they get on with each other. They've got the same values aligned. As long as you've got that, then why couldn't you work out long term? A lot of the time people are giving up, then they're a lack of communication. They're getting in their own head, over-analyzing situations, and they can't just let it be if there's no connection for a bit. Because connection always, generally, I can't say always, but generally comes back. A lot of the time you're not feeling connected with your partner because you yourself are stressed at work, and then you start thinking you've got an issue in your relationship as well, when really that's just because you're stressed at work and you haven't given the time, and they're stressed at work as well. Just chill out a bit is my advice. But then other stuff around the spark, I want to talk about the spark as well as we're on this. I wasn't going to go into this, but I think this is really important as well. I think the spark is just the biggest load of crap ever. The spark, and I learned this from an amazing relationship book that I read years ago before I was managed to find a long-term relationship. And this was the main reason I wasn't in a long-term relationship. So I feel like I've got, credibility to talk about this. Now I'm in an amazing relationship now for years. And that's because I was expecting the spark to be there, like all the time. The spark, there's no science behind the spark, right? The spark the spark doesn't mean, or doesn't not mean, that you've got the potential to have a long-term relationship with someone, right? You may feel the spark, you may feel all the spark is just energy, right? And that energy could just be sexual energy. That energy could just be like a slight match of values on the same topic of an episode that you're all watching on TV or something like that. That spark, people really think like, oh, where's that spark? And then sometimes people get the spark really early on in the first few hours or the first few days or the first few weeks, and then it goes away. Like and then people get surprised. And when that spark, and I say that in brackets, spark goes away, they think that there's something wrong with the relationship when it's just totally irrelevant. You're never going to have a spark all the time. You're never going to have this constant feeling of deep emotional connection with your partner 100% of the time, because life gets in the way, and it's very normal for that spark, and it's very normal not to have that spark. A lot of people are disobeying and pushing away potential partners. I used to do this the same, just because they feel like this spark has gone, or they feel like they haven't got a spark with them or something like that. And as I say, you need to be more looking at your values and how do you get on and how do you bond, and do you want the same things in future, and do you actually like that person, rather than just the spark. Because as I say, the spark a lot of the time can just be an attraction that can also sometimes fade as well. So be careful listening to the stuff about the spark. Generally, as a rule, I've noticed that 99.9% of relationship advice on social media is bullshit. It's just bullshit, right? Get a few books of proper known experts and read them if you're unsure about relationships, because my life changed when I did that. If you want to comment below, I can tell you the books that I actually read. But a few people that have got scientifically backed data on relationships, most stuff when they say like, oh, if you don't feel good with your partner for 2 weeks, then you should break up with them, or 9 signs that you should break up with your partner, all of that is bullshit, and all of that is making you overthink your possibly really good relationship. So point number 8 I want to talk about is the fact that feelings are not facts. Now, I went into this a little bit. I want to dive into it a lot more. Feelings are not facts. A lot of the stuff that you're thinking in your early 20s is simply wrong, or it's simply you just haven't got enough experience to see any situation in the right way. Not all situations. You might be versed in some, but in a lot of them, you won't be seeing it in the right way. Now, I want to dig into a bit deeper in this. For example, I used to own... Let me give you this example. I used to own a gardening business, and I grew that gardening business to 3 vans with a few employees, and we convinced ourselves that that was not a good long-term business model, because we were getting the feeling that it wasn't right for us. We were getting the feeling that it was going to be really hard to scale it up. We were getting the feeling that people would not be willing to pay the plus VAT once we scaled it up. We didn't think we'd get the clients. And we had the feeling that we wouldn't be able to get staff members and stuff like that. If I stuck to that gardening business, now, as I say, no regrets in that situation, because, I've ended up doing well in what I do now. But if I stuck to that gardening business, What I didn't know about that I do know now, is the fact that there's a similar business to what we are that started a similar time to us, that's now got multiple employees, charges a hell of a lot more than what we used to charge, plus VAT. They can get regular employees that work for them all the time. The guys driving around in an Audi R8. Some of the other guys have got very nice houses. They've got very successful businesses. My point being here that we felt a lot of this stuff in our head, and because of our lack of experience, because of our naivety, because of our lack of confidence and belief in whatever we were doing, we convinced ourselves that that wasn't the right opportunity for us, and that it didn't have the potential to be the right opportunity for us. When in reality, all that happened there is that we gave up on an opportunity that we were still early on in. We had done about 1.5 to 2 years in it, and quite frankly had made phenomenal progress. We had loads of clients, we had free vans, and what we were experiencing was normal business issues. Like, when we scale, what are we going to do here? We got overwhelmed with that. How are we going to get employees? How are we going to scale it up? How are we going to charge clients more money? This is just normal stuff. But what we thought that was because we were getting these feelings of overwhelm, because we were getting these feelings of uncertainty, which is what I want to go into as well next. We took that as a sign, as a fact, that we were unable to scale that business. The business was doomed, and ultimately we gave up. In reality, the only issue with that business was us. The only problem with that business was us as directors of the business, because we were naive and we couldn't see the true path, the true reality. So this happens in relationships, it happens in business, it happens in your job. Because you lack that experience, you just let your emotions take over, right? And you don't make the right decisions. And you've got to be careful with that stuff, You can only really learn about this stuff from actually doing it yourself. Because I would say get advice from other people in this stuff, but a lot of them don't really know what you want either, which is another point that I want to go into. But basically, you just need to understand that your feelings are going to try and dismay what's fact. Always look for fact rather than feeling. And some people struggle with this a lot more than others. If something's overwhelming, if something's hard, if something feels confusing, if something feels a little bit unrealistic, and if you feel like you want to achieve it but you're overwhelmed, but you can see others doing it or you can see the potential in it, and you've already proven a certain amount to yourself, then you should probably do it. And don't let your feelings of overwhelm, your feelings of confusion, your lack of experience put you off of an idea. Because if someone else has done it, then you can do it, especially as something as straightforward as like a service business like that, We were lacking experience. We were lacking the understanding of what was required in terms of the hard work that was required, the commitment to actually get that stuff done. And that's why that business failed. And as I say, you can do the same things, listen to your feelings over facts a lot more because you haven't got experience in other areas of life. There's a lot of relationships that I terminated, if you like. That's not really the word that I was going to use, but it's a strange word to use. There's a lot of relationships that I terminated and friendships that I terminated because I was listening to my feelings rather than facts, So always seek facts rather than feelings in any situation. Ask yourself, is this a fact or is this just my feeling towards this situation? So the next point I want to talk about, like compounding and catching up on you and how long that actually takes. Because quite frankly, most people have got these unrealistic expectations about how long things are going to take and what they can achieve in a certain time. So Tony Robbins said this amazing quote. He said something like this. He said, people underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years' time and overestimate what they can achieve in a year. So basically, if you start like a side hustle now or go after a job now, you want to be in your head in a certain situation in a year in order for you to prove that that was the right move for you. And if you're not there, you will then start get itchy feet, and some of you will quit and some of you will consider quitting that idea. When in reality, as Tony Robbins said, that people underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. And that's because compounding whether that, it's a really good idea to type in, by the way, a compound calculator, right? So I invest in the S&P 500 index fund, and that doesn't really start compounding until like 20 years, and then it goes crazy, right? It does compound, but it goes really crazy after 20, especially 30 years. And that's because it's compounding the money that's in there on top of each other by a certain percentage every single year. And then all of a sudden, in the end, you have a big lump that's compounding on top of the compounding that's being created. So get that out now. It's called like Money Chimp, something like that. Type in a compound calculator, put in like 100,000, put in 5,000 top up per year, and then type in where that will be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You'll be shocked by how much it starts compounding after 20 and 30 years. And it's the same in any venture that you go after. You will go after something, and the first year is generally for learning. The second year is for earning, as they say. And that's generally true. But what they don't tell you is that in the second year, especially true in my experience, you can earn some money in a business, some okay money. I'm not talking about people that have got really lucky in AI businesses and made millions in their second year. I'm talking about like normal people that have had a normal experience in this. The first year is for learning. So generally you don't earn loads in a business in the first year. Second year, you can earn some okay or good money. Third year can be really interesting, but then the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10 can just go off the chart crazy. But unfortunately, most people are never going to get to that stage, right? And I've experienced this a lot myself. I've been guilty of this a lot myself because they're not willing to commit to that because they think that because, 2 or 3 years is quite a long time, reasonable long time, but it's not in business years. It's not in business years, something that you're trying to compound. So if you look at these massive brands like Cadbury's that have been around for hundreds of years or whatever, they are like absolutely killing it now. And you just see the end product. But like the first 13 to 15 years of businesses like Cadbury's and stuff like that, or Pepsi, they weren't doing much at all. So I implore you just to have a little bit more patience and start not even thinking that your business isn't in a good position until you're like 3 years onwards. Because in my personal experience, one of my businesses has just turned 7 years old, right? And if I looked at like the month we had last month, now the day of recording this is January, where are we? January the 7th. Last month we did almost $250,000 and we did like 25% margin on that. And I don't say that to brag. I say that that's the power of that compounding. In that first December, I think I did probably 6,000 to 8,000 in sales. And now we did like $250,000 just in 1 month last month. But that jump looked unattainable because of the cash that it required to get there and the experience that was required, the amount of products I had to create to get it to that stage, the team that I had to build to get it to that stage. So what I'm saying is that compounding in the early days will be quite invisible. And some people think that when they get to years 2s and 3s, they might be making not that much or okay money or good money, but then someone's dangling over this other opportunity over here who's been in business for a few more years and they think they're missing out on better opportunities when they were just literally on the precipice of massive success. Because the difference between the 3 years where you've built up all them skills, you've built up all that experience, you've built up all that knowledge, that compounding there, the initial compounding that you need is sort of done. So that means the next 3 years are not going to be the same as the first 3 years. They're going to be compounding a lot quicker. So when you're seeing someone dangling over another opportunity that's been in it for 6 years, you could be in the same financial position with them in the model that you're in. You may not have to switch models, but your mind is sort of thinking that you need to switch models. And that's the best way that I can explain this. That compounding is just, it's such an important thing to take into account. It's such an important thing to take into account. Think about things in like longer time frames, As I say, I started a business, another idea recently, another business recently, and I'm in my head not even thinking about the first year. Whereas I know some competitors and some people that are coming into this are just thinking, right, I'll give it a year and see what happens, or I'll give it 2 years and see what happens. My mind now knows that realistically, that's not going to be in the same position, making the same profit that one of my current businesses is until 3 years. But because of the experience and the knowledge and the skills that I've built up in business, I now know that you don't just need a good business opportunity to get you 100K. You need a business opportunity if you want to get big that has got huge long-term potential. And some businesses compound quicker but they haven't got the same long-term potential. So now what I've done is I've got my skills, I've got my experience, I've got my knowledge, I've got my finances, I've got my resources, and I've put them into a slower compounding model in the early days, but it's got infinitely more scalable in the future. So you get all that skills, you get all them resources by sticking to that first business model, sticking to that first thing and getting that really good. And then deciding if you're going to commit to that thing for the next 5, 6, 7 years, or switching models and putting all of your experience and knowledge into hopefully the same industry, but a different model so that you can compound all that experience and then take that the long run. And that can be your 10-year business that, makes you a lot of money. Now, that's my theory of how it's going to work out anyway, and I'm pretty sure it is. But my main point there is that anything you do is not going to compound for until I would say, as I say, you can get some good experience in the first few years, but 3 years onwards is where you can start to see some really considerable compounding. And that's not in every case, but that's in most cases. I know a guy called Dodge who started a podcast a few years ago, Eventful Lives, and I remember him saying on a podcast recently, very underrated this stuff and very underrated guy, where he said, I remember my podcast for the first couple of years, he said, because I know how long business takes, this is what Dodge said, one of his businesses is like 15 years old now. He said, because I know how long business takes, it takes time, especially in the early days. He said, I didn't even look at my podcast stats. I'm sure he had a little peek at them, but he wasn't monitoring them for the first 2 years at all, because he knew that the first 2 years were just the entry level, first steps that you take in that business, the first few steps. After that, he then said, right, now let's look at the data and then let's scale it up. So what I'm saying here is that compounded experience and skills and knowledge that he's got from his other business, he deployed that into another business he wanted to start. And he didn't even expect anything for the first 2 years. Most of you watching this are going into a business model like I did in the early days, where you're expecting everything in the first 2 years. You've attached everything that you want, everything you desire, every flat or house that you want to buy, every future, every Mercedes that you want to buy, you've attached all of your future to the first 2 or 3 years in business. And if you don't see that in the first 2 or 3 years, because you're putting in a lot of the work, because you're putting in a lot of the effort, because you're still missing out on a lot of weekends, or you're sacrificing parts of your weekend, parts of your evening, and you just, after the 2 or 3 year mark, maybe even 4 years, just before that thing might compound, if you're in a model that has got huge potential, you give up. And you give up because you don't think it's worth it. And that's because you were just on the precipice of that compounding over the next few years. So, yeah, the first few years is always going to be tricky. As I say, facts and feelings are very different. Don't let that get in the way. And then moving on to compounding as well, just don't let that lack of knowledge around compounding and that lack of knowledge and just thinking that things are true that are not true to stop you actually achieving that long-term success. Just to finish it off from them 9 points, I would just say, yeah, it's like a summary. A good example of changing mindsets, I guess, is like me with this podcast. I'm putting in a lot of effort and resources into this at the moment. We're not, we're actually seeing great success compared to what I was expecting. I wasn't expecting hardly any views, and some of our videos getting over 1,000 views, or nearly 1,000, or getting a load of new listeners on Spotify and stuff as well. But I came into this knowing that it would be 2 years until anything happens, and I'm absolutely okay with that. So yeah, compounding's a serious thing, and I actually am under the belief now that you can actually achieve anything if you're just willing to learn the skills that are required, willing to put in that sort of 1% every single day, every single week to get better on something. Set yourself a certain amount of tasks each day to be done, and just get them done. And just don't let your mind screw you over by, luring you into other opportunities, or luring you into false beliefs that aren't true, So guys, please, if you found this valuable, I don't have any sponsors on the show or anything like that, please go ahead and just share the show. I would say that's like the cost of watching the show, is just to share the show with someone if they found it valuable. Share it with a aspiring entrepreneur, or someone that wants to learn about, I don't know, stuff in their 20s, something like that. Share it with someone. If you found value, share it on Facebook, share it on Instagram, share it somewhere. And make sure you follow the podcast on Spotify, or follow it on YouTube, wherever you watch it. And yeah, I appreciate you a lot. Have a fantastic day. I'll speak to you soon.